Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of the New Levels Coaching Podcast. Remember, we are the coaching podcast that brings the endurance world lots of inspiration and education so you can literally go away and run with it. As always, I am your host, Coach Lewis Moses, and co-founder here at NLC, and we are absolutely delighted to announce our official partnership with Suunto, who will be our headline sponsor of the pod for the remainder of 2024. Suunto stands for adventure, and they have been pioneering exploration from right back in 1936. It's about always looking to mentally or physically challenge yourself, whether it's a training run, a tough descent, or a final push to that finish line. Above all, adventure is a mindset. It's about new experiences and just getting out there regardless of the size of the challenge. If there's only one word to define Suunto as a brand, it's adventure. This is a brilliant partnership for us and one we're very honoured to be part of because many of Suunto values align so closely with ours too. As my wife Gemma, co-founder of NLC, said in our launch video, let's get this adventure started. That leads me nicely onto this episode where I'm joined by the Suunto team to talk a lot more about the brand and recent exciting developments, including ZoneSense. ZoneSense is a first of its kind, helping athletes to understand what zones they are training in whilst out there training, whether that's on the trails, the track, the roads, or even on the bike. They use cutting-edge technology to explore a lot more than just heart rate, and we chat a lot more about ZoneSense, the importance of understanding the data, and how this data can help you to train smarter and to race faster. With that as a bit of an intro, I'm going to get right into the conversation, and I hope you enjoy this very special episode with Suunto. Good afternoon, Janne, and a very warm welcome to the podcast. Firstly, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. It's a bit rainy and cold and dark here in Finland, but really nice to be in your podcast.
Well, yeah, the weather's changing here as well. We've had some quite nice weather in the UK, but the autumn is very much here. It was cold today, but I imagine the temperatures are a little bit cooler where you are.
Yeah, we actually had a first snow already last week, so it's not the nicest time to be in Finland. But yeah, well, the winter is coming, so.
Hopefully it doesn't affect training too much. Can you still get out on your bike and out for your runs and, well, maybe not the swims, unless you're going inside, of course.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that I usually train a lot inside, so I ride my bike indoors and I have my own treadmill at home. So yeah, it starts to be the time that I'm not outside at all. So not outdoor guy.
I don't blame you. Well, thank you very much, and I'm glad you're inside for the podcast. It's obviously much warmer, and it's very warm here as well in our studio. Before we kick off, Janne, I'm going to ask you the question I ask all our guests before we get into the podcast, and before I get a little bit more information about you for our listeners. And that question is about inspiration and who inspired you to get into sport? I know you said you're a triathlete predominantly. Is there somebody in particular that inspired you to get into sport from a young age, or even more recently?
Yeah, I actually remember this quite well. I think I was a 12 or 13-year-old guy, and I saw in TV a triathlon race, and there was a young teenager girl who was doing a triathlon, and with the bike that wasn't really a race bike, and so on. And when I saw her doing the triathlon, I was thinking, hey, I can do that. I was doing orienteering at that time as a youngster, and then I was thinking, okay, that looks cool. I mean, you swim and then you bike and then you run. And at that time, I'm close to 50 now, so I think that's like 85 or 88 or something like that. And there was, funny enough, just 500 meters to my home, there was actually a triathlon race that summer, and I did that. But that was that young girl in TV that inspired me. That hey, wait a second, if she can do it, I can do it. So that was in a sense a long journey, long story since then, like several decades of triathlon. But that was the starting point.
Amazing. What a story. Yeah. And it shows you can find inspiration from anywhere. And I guess that young girl is responsible for several thousands of pounds spent on bikes and wetsuits and different things over the years.
Yeah, she is the guilty one. I don't know who she is, but I think I need to, send her a bill. It's quite expensive.
Brilliant. Well, that leads us on nicely to getting to know you a little bit more before we go into the conversation around Suunto and ZoneSense, as I've mentioned on our introduction today. I've been fortunate to sit on some of the webinars that you've presented, Janne, but I fully appreciate our listeners won't have much of an idea of who you are and who you work for. So maybe just kick off with a little bit of background about yourself and the role that you have at Suunto.
Yeah, as mentioned, I'm a close to 50-year-old guy. I have done all my life endurance sports. The triathlon is my passion. On early 90s, that was like I wanted to be a professional, but never were in that level. So that was just a fantasy. But then in last how do I say, in last 15 years, I have done mainly Ironman distance racing. Have been racing in Hawaii World Champs a couple of times, and then different places in the world. My professional background, I have studied biomedical engineering in school as a master of thesis, and then has worked in different roles in different software companies, mainly as a consultant and so on. But I started in Suunto already in 2008, so that's like plus 15 years ago. Mainly came here as a product manager to look after at that stage, our fitness products, especially when we were creating new kind of services to fitness clubs. But then I noticed that for Suunto, we were lacking a proper tools for train athletes to really look at their training sessions and so on. So I established a web service called movescount.com, which was a first open platform for Suunto for anybody to join and check out their training sessions. I was working with that for several years before then I went to lead our digital market and e-commerce operations, and then a few years after that I came back in a sense to our product management and started working our digital ecosystem build up. And nowadays, my main role is basically looking after our overall software development, like what kind of things should we do in our watches and apps and services, but also in the same time leading the training and physiology side of Suunto. That okay, what kind of things should we do for athletes to get most out of the training session. I mean, even Suunto is a quite, like, let's say, known company and in a sense quite big company, you could state, but still. We are still like a startup in a sense, even like over 80 years old company. So you usually have several different roles and several different responsibilities, and so for me as well. So and the training and physiology, of course, is something that I'm pretty passionate about in endurance sports. Actually, I have to say that I also did in Finnish market. I actually wrote a book a few years ago about endurance sports with technology. The idea was that quite many people who are training in endurance sports, who are interested of buying a wearable, they like for Suunto, we usually try to illustrate, which button you need to press to get the heart rate on the watch. But we have less how do I say, guidance on how to train properly. And then when you look at if you read a magazine or you listen to a coach, many times they then tend not to have too many details to understand how the latest wearables and technologies work. So there's a bit like a middle ground that I was thinking that could actually make sense to write a book about how you actually use the latest wearable product and digital assets and features in order to use them efficiently on your endurance training. So that's a bit like a passion here, and also in Suunto that I try to go a bit deeper than not just ZoneSense webinars and so on. So let's explain how to actually use these and not just say that okay, there's the graph and it looks yellow, so yellow is not that good. So
Well, I love that because I guess to tie this all together and where this fits really nicely is firstly, we provide education and inspiration to the endurance world, whether that's runners or triathletes. So it's great that you have that triathlon background to bring to the podcast too. But I think like with the book, what I've been fascinated with ZoneSense as a coach is well, this is great, but how do we actually apply this to the athletes? And that's what I found the most fascinating, and why I'm, I guess, delighted to be partnering with Suunto, because firstly, I still do train and I'm using ZoneSense to inform my own training. But then the big thing for me as a coach is I can then use that and apply that to my learning. But it's really important for the athletes to understand that in order to get them to buy in. So I really like the idea behind the book. I'm not saying we're going to cover everything in the book in this one episode, but hopefully we can do a good enough job between the two of us.
Yeah, I think this kind of podcasts are really great because people from this kind of podcast probably get different kind of tips and hints and then start to try things and it's funny enough because I think ZoneSense is a good example. There's all ongoing manner new kind of technology and measurement and tools and features coming to these kind of tech tools that the principles that you have learned probably haven't changed too much over decades, but what can we nowadays retrieve or conclude or quantify has been changing quite rapidly in recent years, and I assume that this will actually just accelerate now, especially when we think about, for example, use of AI to understand, different correlations, etc. So I would argue that perhaps 10 years ago, quite many features and functionalities on products and softwares were mainly just adding things up. But I would argue that nowadays it starts to be that the intelligence starts to be in a level that you, for even normal coach or really high tech athlete, these things start to actually have value that it's not anymore about just putting this in Excel or paper, but actually the digital things start to actually provide you something that you don't perhaps even know yourself. So I think it's the value start to be there more and more. And ZoneSense is a good example. It's basically still in principle is a complete new measurement, but it provides information to those key things that you have always tried to understand in endurance sports. So it's actually in that sense it's very, very unique that you actually end up with a new function, a new measurement, new technology that is an answer for the things that endurance sports has last 40 years have been actually using. So what is the intensity of the exercise which it tries to answer? And that's a quite cool thing that we are now able to really answer that without any setups and so on. So
I really like the way you've put that, because physiology's been around forever. Human anatomy and physiology hasn't really changed as much as we develop as humans and species. The physiology 40 years ago is very similar to the physiology that we see today, if not identical. But the one thing that has changed, as you mentioned, is the access to that physiology and the data and the technology, and it is forever evolving. And it seems to me as a coach over the last sort of 5 years in particular is just accelerated at a rate of knots. And we're trying to keep up, and there's always these new things come into the market, and understanding them can be tricky. But what I like about ZoneSense, before we get into it, is that ZoneSense, for me, in a way, simplifies it a little bit with just simple things. And that's what has taken me towards it, I guess.
yeah. I think in principle, the ZoneSense, the cool thing about that is that I mean the tricky part here is that I have when we have started working on this ZoneSense technology, we started that a bit over a year ago, but it has been interesting because usually when I have been discussing with internal guys here in Suunto, and I have asked that why do you measure heart rate? It's funny that quite many people can't even answer this first question, that why do you want to measure heart rate? It started to be very different kind of answers that, okay, if I'm running every Sunday, I want to see that if my heart rate is higher or lower. Or somebody else says that I just want to know how hard do I work. And then when you start to ask it, okay, well, shouldn't you use the heart rate, for example, to understand if your effort is easy enough and you can do an aerobic session, or when you do an interval session with harder, that you should be in a certain kind of level that you can actually keep up with those intervals. And then, well, yeah, perhaps. But then when you then start like, oh, how do you then know that is it easy enough actually looking at data? And then the answer starts to be even more confusing. That the basic understanding on what is, for example, easy run for normal person who start to educate them about proper training or understanding what is running training, for example, that kind of things, that okay, what is an easy run is not self-evident. I mean, and now with ZoneSense, the thinking is that, or the measurement is so that, you know, if it's green, it's aerobic. We measure it from heart rate variability. You don't need to know your setup. You don't need to do a testing. It will tell you if you don't know yourself. And then when you start to learn, and the watch actually tells you the information. You don't need to test yourself. So I think that's a very unique thing, that now the product can tell you something that you don't need to evaluate that much yourself. So it's a pretty powerful tool for sure.
Yeah, and I guess that's where we'll kick off with understanding ZoneSense a little bit more. So people are tuning in and probably hearing this for the first time. I'm at an advantage here where, like I say, I've sat through those webinars and now I understand it a little bit more. And I think my biggest take from it was almost exactly what you just described there, Janne, was that it's not just taking the heart rate data, it's actually giving us a broader picture because it's taking heart rate variability into consideration. And somewhat for somebody who suffers with AF, and myself, I found that quite fascinating, and not just from a performance perspective, but more importantly from a health perspective too, and that's something that ZoneSense offers. But if our listeners are tuning in for the first time and thinking, well, what the heck are these two guys talking about? What is ZoneSense? How would we define that to the audience? Bearing in mind, it is obviously a Suunto product and it's something that is available on the Suunto watches, but that is unique at the minute because it's not available elsewhere.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I guess the if we have a short introduction, so the people will understand what we are talking about. So perhaps a bit of a background. So this is not really like Suunto technology. So what we have done is we have partnered with a university spin-off company called Monicardi, and the Monicardi is a team who has been investigating, researching the use of heart rate variability and different analysis methods on the heart rate variability. And I mean, commonly people are using heart rate variability nowadays with several different variables to understand recovery state, you know, during the daytime or nighttime, as Suunto is doing. Now, but during measuring the heart rate variability during exercise is quite difficult, and retrieving a more insight out of the recovery state, also more about that heart rate variability during exercise, is something that Monicardi has now specialized. And they found out that depending of the type of the variability in heartbeat to beat data, they can basically define, are you currently working in an aerobic level or anaerobic, or is it already going over anaerobic threshold? And the point being is that these certain levels, aerobic, anaerobic, over anaerobic threshold, these three levels, these are the levels that are only basically used in endurance sports to define what is the workout intensity. So aerobic running, there's enough oxygen. Anaerobic, you go a bit harder, and over anaerobic threshold is cumulative fatigue, lactate is accumulating, and so on. So you can't go faster. Now the essence here is that by measuring that heart rate variability with this methodology, we can provide you live data. Is your exercise effort in which level? And the cool thing about this is that it doesn't depend which sport you do. Is it running or swimming or cycling? It doesn't depend if you're male or female. It doesn't need to know your activity levels or some kind of setup that you don't need to do testing. It's just a measurement, and this is basically the answer that the endurance sports has been looking for a last 40-50 years, is how do you know this intensity without a huge amount of lactate testing or laboratory testing. And of course, this kind of for the audience to really understand is that that for example, if you are running a marathon in 4 hours, as an example, that's a complete aerobic session. You are running 4 hours completely aerobically. So now if your coach is saying today that you need to run a long run 1 hour, that needs to be aerobic. Well, somebody's running with a heart rate 160 and somebody's running a heart rate 120. Those both can be aerobic. So how do you know?
Yes.
And the challenge, of course, regarding these measurements is that when we just talk about heart rate value, somebody says pace intensity, somebody other uses power in cycling, for example. These are also changing daily basis, and any different sport they are different. So if you want to do, you are a runner, so you may do running. One day you say that, okay, I would like to go and do a bike ride with my friends, but my coach said that this is the aerobic. Well, your heart rate levels are completely different in bike cycling. So if you use the same heart rate values, you probably are anaerobic automatically in cycling, for example. So that's the short nutshell that now the heart rate variability measurement that we have is correlating to the aerobic intensity levels, and now we are able to show it to you live on the watch and in afternoons in Suunto application. So
Perfect. Yeah, and I think to kind of break that down for our listeners and to give them, I guess, a practical example, because I am using the watch now, and it is actually very easy to see when you're out training, as long as you've got it on the right screen. But what we're looking at there is that 3-zone physiology model where we're saying anything below LT1 is aerobic, anything above LT1 and below LT2 is falling into the anaerobic zone, and anything above LT2 is then going more towards lactate VO2 max type work. Quite nicely shown on the graph on the webinar as like a green, an orange, and a red. And then how that correlates on the watch and what I see from a practical standpoint when I'm out running is I have a nice blue zone, which is down the bottom, and that's like recovery almost. And then we've got this green zone, which I'm still aerobic. Then I go into kind of yellow and orange, which is obviously then going above that LT1 turn point. And then eventually when I get up to the red zone, I'm obviously into LT2. And I used it on a hill session the other day, and I was sat in the orange and I was thinking, I've designed this hill session to be a little bit harder than this. So you know what? I'm going to run a little bit harder and just see what happens. And actually ended up having a really good session. But I was using that data to help inform my training, and I was doing it in a practical setting. I think the biggest thing for me as well, which I also know about the watch, and I believe this to be true, and maybe you can shed some light on this, Janne, is that it goes through like a learning period as well. So it learns you as an individual, and this is the key to it, isn't it?
Yeah, so they say it's good to understand that when we are measuring the heart rate variability during the exercise, we need to understand your so-called aerobic level. That when you are doing easy effort, that where the variability is at that stage, and then when the intensity increases, it's a shift change in that variability. And therefore, what we do is that when let's say that you do a first running session ever in Suunto Watch, we try during the workout see if there is an aerobic easy effort, and the watch starts to remember from each session what is aerobic easy. And then it means that for example, at that day when you do a race, there's no easy level at all, everything is hard. That watch also has the capacity to know that, okay, this type of variability that I'm now seeing, this is actually hard effort. It's a big shift for what I'm used to seeing in aerobic session. So that's the learning point. So we basically we are, that's like technical topic perhaps, but we measure this kind of aerobic baseline variability data all the time from every single workout, and we keep that in a memory for different sport groups, because it's also like in cycling that aerobic baseline variability is a bit different level than in running, and different in swimming and different cross-country skiing. It just gives a bit more accuracy on the measurement. So but in practice, if you do your first running session and you do a good warm-up, even from the first session, it already is in place. So
Nice. Yeah, so it picks it up quite quickly, which is one thing I noticed. Like going out the door straight away, it was picking that up. And
Yeah.
obviously, then I'm thinking as I'm going, I'm learning. I guess one of the practical implications of this is, and one thing that I did quite quickly was I turned my wrist-based heart rate monitor off on the watch, and I put my chest strap on because one thing that I listened to on the webinar and I've understood from years of coaching is that the accuracy of that chest strap is far greater. So I believe I should use that more often, which I am doing.
Yeah, it's I mean, even the optical heart rate from the wrist or there's some armbands, for example, from heart rate, is it heart rate 150, 156 or whatnot, pretty accurate anyway. But in order to understand this beat-to-beat data from the heart rate variability, so what the heart rate variability for the audience means that if your heart is beating 60 times in a minute, so in average every beat to beat is 1 second, right?
Yep.
But it's not every second. It's basically milliseconds here and left and right all the time. So it's like ongoing. There's some variation, and this is not possible to measure in optical heart rate because the optical measures the light pulse on from the blood veins, and the heart rate belt that you are wearing in your torso is measuring the electrical signal, which is from every beat to beat, and that's precise data. So unfortunately, this is in order for this kind of measurement to work, yeah, it requires that electrical signal measurement from the torso. So yeah, it works only with the heart rate belt.
Yeah, and I think that's a good kind of message to our listeners already because a lot of people are starting to move towards the armbands with the heart rate, and I can see why from a comfort perspective. Totally, some people struggle with it sat on their torso, and particularly women who have to then put that under a sports bra, and it causes like rubbing and scarring. However, I would like to emphasize to the athletes, particularly athletes that I coach, because some think that these straps on their arms are better because the elite athletes are wearing them now and people see them with them on, but actually the gold standard is still very much the chest strap because of that electrical impulse monitoring as you're talking about, isn't it?
Correct, for sure. Also, of course, I have to say that if you think about, for example, this measurement in practicality point of view, let's say that you do every morning you do an easy run and you keep your heart rate belt. I know in five mornings you one time you run with the belt, and for example our measurement says that okay, with this pace at this time of the morning, usually your this is an aerobic session for you. The pace is 5 minutes per kilometer. Your heart rate is 131, and the ZoneSense illustrate that this is aerobic. Obviously, you could then conclude that okay, when I'm running about this pace around this heart rate, I don't need to wear the heart rate belt every single time. So similar kind of efforts, then you learn yourself, and that's perhaps a bit of thinking here as well. That for some athletes, I believe that this is also a way to test yourself. So if you do a tempo run and you want to really see that is this effort a still aerobic, is this closer to the anaerobic threshold or whatnot. Perhaps this is a way to evaluate your condition, but no need to use in every single time if that's uncomfortable in one way or another. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because we encourage people as coaches to run to RPE and run to feel because we still feel like that's the best measure of your own kind of effort is to understand that. And particularly in major races like marathons that you see where, the signal goes because of the built up areas. So you then don't have an idea of what the accurate pace is. Then it's really good to understand that effort and that RPE. So as you say, Janne, this is a really good way to probably sense check it against the data that you're seeing, but not always use it so that you can check it off against one another.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also scenarios where there's couple additional notes about this is for sure that for example with the ZoneSense data there is a lag on the data, so it's basically the same as if you would measure lactate in a certain sense that if you do an interval session, let's say that you start full speed right now, the ZoneSense start to show that intensity where you are only after like let's say 1 to 2 minutes. So it will take a period of time before it comes to it. It's basically a physiology point of view, but there's also research, the measurement point of view that there is a bit of lag. In the same way as you would measure lactate, it will take time before it starts to build up. So if you use the ZoneSense and you do a 30-second hill repeats, you will not gonna get a right levels there. So in that sense, also that if you do let's say a tempo run for 20 minutes, a fast pace, and you use this ZoneSense, okay, great, you can see your levels. And then when you do next time, you do a 1 minute repeats. Perhaps you don't use ZoneSense, but you know the pace and heart rate information from that tempo session, so you can use that as a added value. So I guess that's a one key point. There's other thing that I would like to also highlight here is that when we talk about some special workouts, that for example racing is a good example. So if somebody does a marathon run or ultra run or triathlon race or whatnot, I would argue that many times the heart rates are completely different that they're used to. And of course in shorter distances, I mean if you go and run a 10K race, if you are a normal runner, you probably know pretty much within a 10 seconds per kilometer what is the pace that you are going to try to get. But let's argue that you are going to do a first marathon ever, that you are going to do a trail run that will last 5 hours. It's much more difficult to understand what is actually the intense level that I should or could keep up with. And there has been a research done on the long sessions that the intensity levels, so-called intensity level metrics like heart rate or pace or lactate, they are completely different in the first hour compared to last hour. So now what we are a bit elaborating, that could ZoneSense be something that you could actually be able to pace yourself when you go into long sessions, because to be very strict, we don't really measure the metabolic state of the body. We don't measure that are you aerobic or anaerobic. We measure the stress of the heart with variability. And there's different aspects that impact that stress of the heart. And one aspect is, are you tired? Is there cumulative fatigue? Are you heating up? We cannot say that, yet that, hey, if you want to run 100 kilometers on trail, keep the ZoneSense green all the time and you are completely fine even at the last 10Ks. We don't know that. But there's a bit of indication that this could be a tool to actually use in those scenarios that no metric currently can really can be used in pacing in those weird situations. So let's see. I mean, that is an interesting question. Let's see what the data will show.
That is interesting because I was out at UTMB this year as a coach, and I was watching the 50K, the 100K, and the UTMB race, the 100 mile. And one thing that is apparent in ultra running is that everybody slows down. It's just kind of who slows down the least, who then goes on to win often. But everybody is slowing down. And what I found fascinating from people's heart rate data that was published after the event, for those who did share it, was that despite them, so for example, in the 50K, one of the athletes, he was climbing as hard as he was at the start in terms of his effort, or what he felt like was that effort. So he said it was actually the hardest climb of the day, and it was really hot, and he got hot at this point. But actually, despite it being the hardest climb of the day, his heart rate was lower than it was at the start of the day when he found those climbs easier. Because, as you mentioned, muscular fatigue had set in. I guess durability was starting to really set in, and the body was really starting to suffer, and the heat was playing its part. And at that point, the heart rate can't get into the same zone as it was before, despite your effort being so high, if not higher than it was at the start. So that's a really fascinating point. If it could learn that, that'd be amazing.
There was I think we have in one of our YouTube lectures, we actually have this case, but there was a case with our research team who was working with this new measurement. He did a run half marathon race in indoor track, so very like same conditions all the time, and it was really great example that the guy was running in a front group. I think it was like first 15 minutes. The pace and heart rate was both were well out under the anaerobic threshold, well under the LT2 level. So because his race was about 1.5 hours, so it was in the right place. Now, then happened an accident. His shoelaces came undone, so he had to stop. Put the shoelaces on tight, and then what happened next for the next 10 minutes? He was running to get back to the front group of the race. So now what happened was that the pace and the heart rate levels were above anaerobic threshold. And when we look at the ZoneSense data at that stage, ZoneSense was same. So before the shoelaces came undone, ZoneSense was in a sense under anaerobic threshold. When he was speeding up, it was over the anaerobic threshold. But now happens the interesting part. Next, half an hour, he started a bit slow down. Heart rate started a bit decline, pace started a bit decline. ZoneSense kept in that threshold level, anaerobic threshold level. Last half an hour, pace dropped, heart rate dropped. Okay. The heart rate was, I think, 15, 20 beats lower than it was in the starting place, or at least 10 beats lower, and the pace was dropping like 20 seconds per kilometer slower. ZoneSense kept in a threshold level. So when the coach would have said in the last 3 kilometers that, why don't you run faster? You are running 20 seconds slower than you started, and you are running with a heart rate of 10 beats slower. Well, he cannot. He is completely cooked.
Yeah.
His muscles are toasted. But now the ZoneSense is showing that this guy is doing all he can. And so that was this was actually the first example that when I met the guys a bit over a year ago, this was the first example that they showed me. And when I saw that graph, okay, now we actually have a complete new intensity measurement in our hands. And now if we are able to learn more about this, that there is more than just the metabolic state measurement. This is actually potentially more about, are you able to work harder or not, kind of measurement. This will be a definitely killer for the ultra distance guys or longer runner people. So yeah, that was a really amazing data. So
Absolutely. I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that because generally speaking, what we have when we see that and you see people slow down and they see it as athletes, they see their pace slow, they see their heart rate drop and they automatically say, oh, it must be psychological. They say, oh, I just wasn't able to push as hard. It must be psychological. Why can't I push as hard? But actually what ZoneSense is saying here and what we know to be true is that you are working as hard as you possibly can. You are just cooked. And that heart rate data is dropping and the pace is dropping, unfortunately. But you are still giving it 100%. That's just where you are due to all those factors that have come before it. So, yeah, that's a really a fascinating story, and I'll be interested to see how it develops in particularly those longer distances where I think it is so important because it's so hard to judge. If you're in a 10-hour race, for example, everybody feels easy at the start. It's natural, isn't it? If you don't, then you're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, there was even that one was like one anecdotal evidence on this. There was also one research paper that was published last month, which was looking at now I don't remember this by heart properly right, but it was so that there was first they did a ramp up test, like lap test, and then if I remember correctly, it was like 90-minute running after this, and then a new ramp up test again. And when they looked at the intensity levels of the first ramp up compared to last one, the heart rate pace levels completely changed, which is logical, but also explains that okay, when you have this, when you are tired, it's a different pace, it's a different heart rate that you are anticipating that where the aerobic levels are or anaerobic levels. But funnily enough, when they looked at heart rate variability with the older technology called DFA1 analysis, they were able to say that okay, this actually is quite close to actual intensity levels that you are able to maintain, and that was DF. Now not confusing too much, but there is a different ways that you measure heart rate variability. When we talk about recovery state, there is a so-called root mean square successful differences, that how it's analyzed. And now what we are using with ZoneSense is called dynamical determinate fluctuation analysis, DDFA. So it looks at the variable different ways. There has been earlier a measurement called DFA1, which the research paper it was using, which is not that robust compared to what we are now doing, but still, even with that, it was better than anything else. So, but yeah, again, it's a big question, because when you're doing the races, there might be, for example, nutrition issues in your race, or it might be, the temperature or something else will impact. Even like if you are in a higher altitude, or then, for example, in trail running, the technical components. So it's a bit hard to conclude that, when you look at the ZoneSense data, for example, that can you trust the ZoneSense, what it says, or do you still need to evaluate every other aspect? But of course, currently what you are thinking without the ZoneSense, I mean, you can't use pace or power heart rate in long sessions in a way that, okay, I'm just keep my heart rate at 140, I'm fine with in 10 hours. Well, most of you are not. So,
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a really good point. And before we go on to that in a bit more detail about how we bring in all those variables, I think what I want to touch on so far is obviously we've partnered with Suunto, and this is a really good conversation about ZoneSense. But one thing that I've found since going over to Suunto, particularly in that trail running world, is I've not just enjoyed using the Suunto ZoneSense. I've enjoyed using the map function as well. I think that's very clean. It's very clear. Having the ability to have offline maps as well is just really good. And I like how slick the watch is, and the Race S is a really nice fit on my wrist. So those sort of things as well. So yes, it's got ZoneSense, but I feel like Suunto also comes up against some big, market leaders. Maybe Garmin is seen as the market leader, and people often drift to Garmin quite naturally, but I've actually gone from Garmin to Suunto, and I'm actually really enjoying using my Suunto. So there's a lot of other factors there, that not just ZoneSense. ZoneSense is one of the qualities on the Suunto watch, which is a new quality, but it has obviously continued to develop as well, and I'm getting really good functionality out of it. So I wanted to add that in there whilst we go on to all these other metrics, because in the trail running world, I think it's fair to say, Janne, one thing that we can't measure is things like the impact of running downhill and the cost of that. So it might be that ZoneSense is picking up that the heart rate's dropping down, but we might be smashing it down a descent, and that might be having huge implications on the quads, for example. And that's where, like you're saying, we've got to use a bit of common sense here as well, haven't we, as athletes, and say we need to know all these other things that are contributing towards what might pay the price later on down the line.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with all the measurement tech that you are using, I mean, it might be core body temperature, it might be glucose levels or whatnot. So, yeah, it makes sense that you start to combine and try to figure out with yourself. And of course, we are all individuals, so it might also work a bit different for each other. I have to still say, when you were mentioning about the downhills, because that's also one interesting point. Again, a nice story about when we were using ZoneSense, and we are testing usually in Suunto when we are making the products and features, we are testing them from different athletes all over the world, and gathering feedbacks and then honing the features forward. So there was one guy who asked me that why did the ZoneSense behaved like this, and he was giving me a graph that only had a heart rate and ZoneSense, and it looked like that when the heart rate at the first part of the exercise, the heart rate was going up, and so was ZoneSense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but then the later part of the session, the heart rate was declining, but ZoneSense was still quite high. And first I was asking, okay, what was the intensity of the exercise? Does the ZoneSense still make sense? That is, yeah, well, it was like hiking with bit more effort. But okay, it was hiking. Can you give me an altitude data? And then he provided me a graph of altitude. And the altitude was basically like a pyramid. So it was the first part was uphill, and the second part was downhill. And when the first part was uphill, heart rate was high, and so was Jones's. Very logical. You were higher intensity, you go uphill, you were doing a lot of work. But the more interesting part was the downhill. When he was coming downhill, there was a lot of muscular work that he was doing. Now the heart rate started to decline, but Johnson didn't. So it was again that sort of, okay, wait a second, is this now an indication that we are able to somehow with Johnson still measure that overall stress that the body will make to your heart, even when the cardiovascular system is not now working in a massive effort. So I don't want to conclude too much there, but there seems to be that there is a bit more impact what you can see on Jonesen's when there's a lot of muscular effort and not just the cardiovascular, because again we don't measure only the metabolic state but also the stress levels. So
yeah, fascinating. So what we're saying there is it's not just measuring that heart rate, and if it was just measuring heart rate, to everybody it would look like you're running downhill, you're recovering. But what we're saying here is it could in fact be taking the stress of the heart, and the heart is becoming more stressed because you're running downhill maybe at a faster speed, and that's having a greater cost on the muscles. So
correct.
if ZoneSense is picking that up, that would be incredible, especially for me, because I've been known to cramp later on in races because of going down hills too quickly. And maybe I'm looking at my heart rate data thinking, oh, this is easy, but actually it's not so easy because it's having a big muscular cost on the body.
Yeah, and of course now even with the Joneses we have quite nice level like basics, like okay, the normal exercise session, how they measure. But for example, these kind of cases, that's why I'm a bit saying that we will see. Perhaps it can. This
Yeah.
is so new tech. I mean, we launched this now in September, so it's like it has been out for like 6 weeks. And this is also quite fresh research. I mean, the first research papers about this was published 12 months ago. So there is a lot of these kinds of unknown things. So that's why I'm a bit hesitant of saying that it can track the steep downhill intensity for the body. But there is something like that we can actually see, and that's why we have also said on our webinars and our YouTube and even our websites that if there is a interesting use cases, if you are writing a review of this, or if you are doing your own podcast or a video where you share the experience, we would like to know, because it would be nice to share to other endurance community that what they found out. So because there might be things that there are things that we don't know. So but there is athletes and coaches now testing and trying this out and learning and perhaps finding out a new kind of mechanisms that we are not aware. So that's and we were the point was that when we started working with Monicardio on this a year ago, we wanted to go out as fast as possible, and this kind of thing that we from research paper we publish something in 12 months, that's unheard. Why I have been working here in Suunto for 15 years. We have never gone so fast to the market. But was the reason it was also that this was so interesting, but the basic thing was clear, but there's so much interesting other stuff that okay, if we share it fast, perhaps we get a more intelligence, more insight, and can also develop this further into new kind of tools. So we don't know what's the next tool that we will implement here. So
And I like that because you're not waiting for perfection and waiting around too long. You're actually putting it out there to learn from the process, and by sharing it and being out there, you're going to learn more from that, which is great. And having more of those stories and more of that evidence and more people testing it is a really good place to be. And it's quite exciting. I mean, people jump on it, and think, like, even myself, oh, it's going to tell me if I'm going to cramp downhill, and we're all looking for those quick fixes. And I guess that's where I want to go to next for like the coaching implications of this, because we know with sport that often we have to be more intuitive than we think, and the data is amazing, technology is amazing, but we've got to be so in tune with our bodies. And you've given some really good examples, Janne, about when to use it and maybe then when not to use it from an athlete. But looking at it as a coach as well, I think one of the biggest problems we see when we coach athletes is not getting them to run faster. It's actually getting them to run slower. And this for me could be a bit of a game changer, because it could show people you are not running aerobically, because a lot of people don't run aerobically. They find that challenging.
I think that's a very, but it's a global issue. And unfortunately, you could argue that quite many people who are new to running, running itself might be too hard as an intensity point of view. That they
Yeah.
should try to do some other type of exercise to keep the most of the volume aerobic or easy. So for example, even in running sessions, that should you walk partly and run partly, or do some other exercise type like cycling or etc. Because obviously well, it's not obvious, but if you look at the index distribution of what kind of sessions you should have, it's evident that you need to have still most of the volume should be from cardiovascular exercise. It should be aerobic and easy effort. And if somebody wants to start running and every single run is actually anaerobic stress, it's a quite stressful and leads to injuries, overloading. Running is not fun if you can't run easily. So yeah, I would argue as well that one of the key benefits for sure for coaches is that if you use Suunto products, if the run is not green, then perhaps you need to slow down a bit, or perhaps even figure out also other types of exercises to keep these things aerobic. So
It's a really good point that you make. I think we prescribe a lot of run walking to people who are particularly new to running. In fact, when they come on and they have like a completion goal and it's their first 10K, half marathon, a lot of their aerobic work is encouraged to be either run walking or even walking, because that's the bit that's often neglected. And we don't mean run walk as in like an interval session either, which is a mistake that some people make, is they think, okay, well, I can now go faster because then I've got a walk. It's actually, no, it's an easy run followed by a walk to try and keep that heart rate down and to keep the stress on the heart down as well. And then hopefully they stay in that aerobic zone. But there's some really good points you mentioned there about adding in some forms of cross training as well, whether that be swimming or cycling or cross training at the gym. I know of people in Finland or places like that, they might incorporate some cross country skiing if they're very good at it as well, but that can be a hard exercise. But I think for people who are listening into this as well, the other benefits that has is it actually offloads the body as well if people are new to running as well. So it takes the impact away. And because often people, when they find running, they can build up too quickly and then end up injured. And that also creates problems. But there's some really good points that you provide there about keeping things aerobic. You mentioned, Janne, about intensity distribution. That's something that we're big on as a coaching company, trying to get people to train at different intensities. And obviously, this is what ZoneSense really does look at, is those different intensities. Am I right in thinking, as a coach, often the biggest mistake that we do see is people spend too much time at those higher intensities and not enough time at the lower intensities? But it is paramount to have a range of intensities within a training plan.
Yeah, I think there's of course different kind of intensity distribution models that people use, but even like these kind of national or global level like guidelines on exercise usually have that the biggest volume is easy, then there needs to be an intensity component in workouts, and nowadays also they suggest a strength training as well there. Now, I mean, I don't know if you have already noticed, but in Suunto, of course, what we do is that we try to. I mean, we have our own training model that is, in principle, is that we look at the training aspect, recovery aspect, planning, progress, and in the training itself, we try to illustrate the training load, the training intensity, training impacts, and nowadays, if you use a Suunto for some time, we also provide information Suunto application. What is your index distribution? Are you polarized model? Are you pyramid? Is it a high intensity? And so on. So this kind of terminology for many people are like, what does a polarized training model actually mean? Well, 20% is higher intensity, 80% is aerobic, but we actually try to evaluate your workouts automatically and provide this type of information as well, that if your coach is saying that we should turn into polarized model, you can actually see on the Suunto app that I have been doing that for the last 3 weeks, so no problem. So it's but again, for us, I mean, you were saying that there should be a high intensity component. To be honest, so we have a Suunto point of view, we have tried not to say how to train, because there's of course different kind of principles that people believe, and there's a research papers who have looked at different types of intensity distribution, and to be honest, every model has said that they work. Some work just a bit better. So I myself, if I would honestly say, I would say that, hey, use polarized model if I would need to pick one. But there is, for example, quite good benefits for some athletes that they're doing pyramid model, where the huge volume is in the middle ground, and then some people perhaps, for example, are walking a lot during the daytime, so it could be that the exercise should be only about high intensities because their overall active level is so high. I mean, if you are a postal office worker riding a bike and every single day 8 hours a day, well, probably the intensity that you need to do exercise wise is hard. So I don't want to suggest for people how they should train, but well, I have my own preferences.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to kind of round things off, is that everybody is so different, aren't they? And not one training model will suit one individual. And also, training models can change over a period of time, depending on what phase of training you're in as well, and depending on the type of event you're aiming for. And that's a big thing that we work on individually with athletes, is understanding that. But I think one thing that annoys me as a coach is when, people preach on social media of saying, oh, just do 80-20 training. That works for everybody. And it's like, well, I get what you're saying. It is a good training model, but actually it might not be the best training model for that individual.
That was very good point that you made. So that depending of the season, like where you are. I mean, personally, for example, when I'm doing the Ironman racing, it's a good example where currently now is November, and my next race will be in Ironman Texas in April. So currently I'm doing a lot of, let's say, hard effort, speed, strength, high intensity, a bit of aerobic there. But when I'm there in somewhere in February, March, there starts to be a lot of race type sessions, like so high volume, but with quite considerable, with quite high intensity. Well, it's of course if you do a 5-hour ride, it's not super intense, but it's still like a loading work. So there's a completely different kind of balance in the intensity now compared to what I will be in 4 months from now. So yeah, that's a good point. Even for same person, within few months, things will change.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's similar to those who are, the London Marathon is obviously a huge marathon over here, which is also in April in 2025. And it might be that some athletes at the minute are focusing on like VO2 max work to try and improve that area. But as they get into kind of February, March, then that specificity needs to go up, the volume needs to increase. And as you quite alluded to there, Janne, that then durability also needs to improve as well. So there needs to be a certain level of that volume done at a certain intensity too. So then your training model looks completely different to what it looked like in November, just 3 or 4 months apart. So yeah, I think it's a really good point, again, to say that we don't have to stick to one training model. We do have to have different intensities in there if we want to get real benefit from it. Even from a general health perspective, I'm forever saying to my parents, don't just go out and walk. At least add a little bit of intensity into your week somewhere. And as you quite rightly pointed out too, also add some strength training in there as well, because as we get older, that is also super important. So some really good messages there for people that is not really anything to do with ZoneSense, but just some very good training. Some practical training elements to take away as well. So yeah. Excellent. I guess to finish off, Janne, I just wanted to ask you where people could find out more about, Suunto and ZoneSense and really find out that education. I know you've done a great job at explaining it there, but I've also been on these webinars where there's some really good stuff out there now. So where can they go and find out more about this type of stuff?
I mean, if you want to learn more about Suunto, of course, Suunto.com is a good place to start. There's also for ZoneSense, we actually published our own site called Suunto.com ZoneSense, so you can learn more from there. We have also started in YouTube a lecture series on training principles, and we have a ZoneSense dedicated YouTube videos there. I think there's 2 of them right now. So there's actually a webinar that we made just recently last week, which was published in YouTube. I think it was yesterday. And then Jones has had earlier already 1 hour lecture about these basic principles. We have a thinking that we would continue with these lectures on YouTube. So this again, if you want to really learn a bit more in detail, different things, how Suunto functions, but basically from the customer or user perspective. So, for example, the next episode that we will be filming will be about recovery. So that's not yet in YouTube, but it will probably be there within a month. So there we will talk about heart rate variability during nighttime measurement. And one key thing what I was supposed to say earlier, but now I remember to say it, when you were saying that it's still about people, how do they feel, and ways to follow yourself. We actually in Suunto, I think we are pretty proud of that. We have had over 10 years a question that we ask from people at the end of the exercise. How did you
How do you
feel?
feel? Yeah.
And that's like something that coaches have been asking for athletes for decades. How did you feel in that session? And it's personal feeling. So it might be that you are maximum effort and you are feeling great, or it can be that you do an easy 30-minute jog and you are feeling lousy. So it's an indication of like recovery, like understanding where is your states. So that we will talk about also in the next YouTube lecture.
Yeah, my wife mentioned that on her watch. She said that's one of her favorite features about the watch. And again, from a coaching standpoint, it's a really good point because the data may look amazing, but somebody may have felt awful doing that
Yeah.
session. And when you get that feedback, it's important to recognize that as a coach because they might have smashed a session out of the park in terms of data, but actually they might be coming down with an illness or something, and that's why they didn't feel so great. So yeah, it's a really nice feature that at the end of the run, the little smiley faces come up and you can just scroll your watch to whichever one you want to select. And yeah, I really like that addition to it. So yeah, there's some really good places that you can go and find out more about Suunto in general and ZoneSense as well as all the other things that are coming out. I guess, from a partnership perspective, the reason we found this to be such an attractive partnership with New Levels Coaching and Suunto was because our values align in so many ways, and it's not just about pushing ZoneSense and saying actually this is right for everyone. It's actually providing a lot of education around it too. And this is what I found fascinating from this podcast and from the webinars and from everything out there. It's not just, oh, we've launched ZoneSense, this is great. There's actually a whole heap of education and research and things that people can go and read upon. And I think that's great because then it gives people a real insight into what this actually is. So yeah, you guys are doing a great job, Janne. So keep bringing that education to the environment because it really is. I guess it's game changing because you're putting education behind the things that you're putting to market, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think it's you hit the nail there. So it's like the feature itself is the last thing. I mean, let's figure out how to make people faster and then educate them, and then we will build tools for that purpose. So
Amazing. Well, we will end it on that note because that is a great note. Let's keep figuring out how to make people healthier, make people faster, because everybody loves those personal bests and those big achievements, whatever adventure they choose to go on. Thank you so much for your time, Janne. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we do leave our listeners with a lot of useful information to take away?
no, just keep running.
Well, that's how I sign off every time. Yeah, I say keep on training, keep on running. If you are racing, best of luck to you. And if you are training, continue to enjoy your training that you're doing. And we'll see you all again very, very soon. Thanks, Janne, and thanks to everyone for tuning in.
Thank you very much. See you.